Welcome everybody to the Gamification Revolution. It is a beautiful, beautiful sunny Thursday, and I'm coming to you from Cape Cod in Provincetown, Massachusetts, where it's gorgeous. You can see the ship behind me over one of my shoulders here. That's how you know I'm on Cape Cod. And my
Yeah.
guest today is Tim Chang, who I'm guessing is somewhere in California. Hello, Tim.
Good morning.
Welcome. So for
Thank
those of
you.
you who are joining us for the first time, welcome. You'll need to log in using Twitter or one of the other login buttons that you can see somewhere around the screen, and you can join the conversation. That allows you to chat with us live here, ask your questions. And if you have a video camera, you can actually even come on live and ask Tim and I any questions that you might have about gamification, venture capital, rock music. There are buttons on your screen somewhere. They say camera, they say submit a question. You'll need to log in, click one of those buttons, and you can join us. And if you're listening here on the podcast, unfortunately, you can't ask questions, but you can follow me at @gzakurum and Tim at Time Change. And if you're curious, you can go back and watch Tim's amazing panel presentation along with some of the other talks he gave at the recent Gamification Summit by following the link down at the screen or go to gsummit.com to listen. Okay, Tim. So you are this amazing, prescient, forward-thinking venture capitalist who's been on the Forbes Midas list. Everybody loves you. Let me ask you a question. How did you end up seeing the idea that gamification companies were worth investing in? How did that come to you in the first place? Because you were very early.
There's a couple inspiration points. The first is just being a lifelong gamer. I grew up programming and playing games. My first memory, actually, as a kid, is my dad brought home an original Apple II computer. I think this was like 1980. And the first thing I said, Dad, I want to play games. And he looked at me and said, Well, there's no game companies. This thing is brand new. And then he chucked an Apple soft manual at me and said, Here, make your own. So I learned to program BASIC because of that. And so kind of always thought about the inner workings of games. Even programming little text adventures and things like that. So that was ingrained in my thinking. But then I got really addicted to role-playing games, RPGs. And in RPGs, the hallmark of these games is you have a character that you spend hours lovingly crafting who you want to be, whether you're a wizard or a fighter or whatever. And it's all about min-maxing these little traits like strength or intelligence or charisma and unlocking skills. And you obsess over how you want to craft your character in the game. And it struck me one day, it was just sort of, how come we don't treat our real life that way? I mean, life is the ultimate role-playing game, but we don't think of leveling up or, kind of planning what kind of skills we want to have in our own lives. It's more haphazard often, or just dealing with fire drills. So that was one inkling. And then the second was, as we saw more enterprise companies and the challenges Fortune 500s deal with for things like customer retention, loyalty, engagement, these actually struck me as things that were very similar to game-like mechanics, and so just it became more and more common sense that, hey, all these tricks of customer acquisition, onboarding, engagement, conversion that we learned through, say, free-to-play games, the freemium model, those are highly applicable to business, whether it's for gamifying internal employee behavior or gamifying what you want from your end users or your customers.
So, all right, so you kind of strike a chord there that I think is familiar to a lot of people. Like, hey, I'm a gamer, I grew up around games, and therefore all of this stuff makes sense to me. How do you think that kind of game exposure or game let's call it the gamer generation or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
How do you think that influences the kind of entrepreneurship skills of entrepreneurs in companies?
What we've seen is that ex-game people are fantastic hires for these next generation B2B, or even as we call them B2B2C companies, meaning that the offering is something a Fortune 500 might be giving to their customers or employees, but you make your money on a B2B enterprise sales model like SaaS or services. But these ex-game people have fantastic skills because they've been trained in the boot camp of A/B testing, analytics, data-driven decision making, rapid iteration of features and testing. And so they're used to an incredibly fast time cycle and measuring the results in real time. And also having a bit of this delight or sort of beautiful experiences mentality. And, if I were to say to you, enterprise software should be a beautiful experience and delightful experience, you would have thought I'm crazy. Nobody threw around terms like that before in the world of enterprise, but it's very commonplace now. And I think that's influenced by, folks who are experienced from the game industry, game players coming into these enterprise companies. The one caveat that I'll say is a lot of the flack that gamification gets, people say, that's crazy, you can't make that fun, it's not a game. That presupposes the definition of a game is all about fun. I've always espoused that a game is really just three things: a rule system, a objective, and a score or a measure. If you look at it that way, everything can be a game, whether it's, e-commerce sales or getting into college or whatnot. So if you remove this fixed dogma that game equals fun or frivolity, then the frameworks for design apply universally, and that's the part that's most interesting.
Um, so many interesting things that you're saying there that I want to dig in on a little bit. So you said, so from your view, like gamers make good hires, or people who grow up in the games industry make good hires. But those
Yes.
two groups of people are not necessarily the same, right? There's like the people who studied in the games industry because they worked for EA or they worked for Valve or Activision or something. And then there's
Yep.
the like, the millions of people who grew up playing video games. Do you think that playing video games gives you some kind of advantage either as an entrepreneur or as a hire in startups? Or not really?
Possibly, but you know what? Even the term gamers, there's a lot of segments within gamers, and the usual stereotype is the hardcore gamer. This is the fanboy, 18-year-old, lives at home, kind of buys every game out there, plays 20 hours a day, doesn't shower, has no social life. That's the historical stereotype of a gamer, and those are actually the worst possible customers to serve. They're often very finicky, they're trollers, they're flamers, they complain a lot. Those are not actually, say, the ideal employees you want. What I'd say, like a picture perfect employee would be sort of a ex-Zynga analytics expert lead, on multiple titles, who's understood how to launch titles, but then manage them through the life cycle. And they may or may not be a hardcore gamer. They probably understand casual games and social games for sure, but that's what I'd probably try to distance is this stereotypical, Gears of War addict living on pizza in the basement, as what constitutes a gamer or somebody from the game industry now.
So Ben Gordon, who's a well-known venture capitalist at Kleiner Perkins,
Mhm.
and famously former senior executive of Electronic Arts, and often talks about gamification, invested in lots of companies like Zynga. Also, Bing's talked a lot about how games can be good training grounds for employees, kind of doing a sort of senior statesman role for the games industry. What do you think about that question, which I sort of asked you before about as it relates to actually being an entrepreneur itself? Like, do you think it's useful to have either game play or game industry experience as an entrepreneur, not just as an analytics hire?
Yeah, I would say so. And here's a quick example. Any entrepreneur should go through the first 10 levels of a good social game, something by Zynga or other folks like that. Pay particular attention to the interface, but also the onboarding process. That's the way that the interface reveals to you what to click next, what to do. Notice how explicit it is and how guided it is and how low friction it is. Games are absolutely the best ideal in terms of demonstrating low friction user onboarding, activation, and then engagement retention. That's where gameplay is really useful as a learn by doing tutorial for low friction onboarding experiences. I would argue every mobile app, every enterprise piece of software should have a similar onboarding experience for new users. You shouldn't need training. You shouldn't need manuals. You shouldn't have to read the FAQ. The system should teach you how to use it in a sort of almost brainless but enjoyable and no friction way.
So don't I mean so Tim, we all agree with you, right? Obviously I agree with you on that, and I think everybody from this generation says yes, absolutely. But don't you think that given how bad most enterprise software is, just taking a turn in that direction, doesn't this create a huge opportunity that this next generation of entrepreneurs schooled in games, thinking about things through that prism of design, thinking about gamification in a very low level way, just like it's part of their view of the whole world, doesn't that give them some advantage to kind of like upend existing enterprise software vendors who, to be honest, you can swing a bat and not hit well designed, beautiful, great
Yep.
onboarded enterprise software?
Yep. Yeah, that's where we're investing actively these days, whether it's Badgeville, Gigya, those kinds of companies. And the reason for why this is such an opportunity is the history of enterprise software is was often built by vertical domain experts who were consultants. They would consult on a project for a client and then productize it over time. But it was very functionally built and often spec'd by engineers as well. So that's why, say, a CRM system like Salesforce.com is all about tabs and buttons. It's fully featured, but it's so complicated, you need training just to use it. So that is when you take those enterprise software products from a buyer standpoint, who's the buyer?
Okay, I think we may have lost you there for a second, Tim. Hopefully you'll be back.
Oh,
There you
can you
go.
hear me? All right.
Yeah, yeah,
I
we
was
got you
saying
back
that.
now. You were talking about the buyer.
Oh, got it. Yeah. So I was saying that no end user of Salesforce.com actually likes to use Salesforce because it's a top-down product driven for compliance and workflow. So flip that around. Today's entrepreneur should be thinking about what is the life of that end user, that salesperson like? What are their headaches? What are the friction points in their day? Could I design a CRM system that actually they want to use, that's pleasing, that makes their life easier, as opposed to just targeting the economic buyer who's that VP of sales trying to drive compliance. Does that make sense? It's a completely
Yeah,
different view of designing products.
absolutely. And it's so interesting, creates lots of opportunity, which we're talking about now with Tim Chang, amazing venture capitalist. You can follow him at Time Change, and you can find out more about gamification by checking out gsummit.com and watching some of the videos there. So it sounds like you see a great opportunity going forward with enterprise and the application of gamification principles, design principles to enterprise software challenges. Now, I have to tell you, at the very beginning of this discussion, probably in 2010, that would have caught me. That caught me very much off guard. I
Hmm,
was, my first book was about marketing and gamification, and
right.
I always thought of it through that loyalty prism. Did the
Yep.
enterprise thing catch you off guard?
Yeah, it wasn't what I immediately thought of. I always thought of gamification as next-gen loyalty, which it still is for, say, consumer-facing applications. It's just that the enterprise market might be even larger. And the way to size it, think of every billion-dollar plus enterprise software company today, whether it's Concur or Salesforce or any of those, and imagine that those could be disrupted with a beautiful product that's gamified. And here's the trick, designed for the end user in mind, not the economic buyer. That means that your product is not sold to a VP or CMO level person. It's actually adopted, often freemium style, bottoms up by the end users themselves who like using it. It's fun, it makes their work life better. And then once you've infected half the department, the VPs have no choice but to buy the enterprise license version of it. So there's endless opportunities. You can take the entire stack, everything from expense account management. So Expensify is doing that. You could take CRM, disrupting Salesforce. Marketo is trying to leverage some gamification principles in marketing automation. So all of these giant enterprise companies, you add that up, that's multi billions that stand to be disrupted through these kind of next gen design principles using gamification.
Right. And at the core is this idea that we're trying to convince the employees of these companies to want to use the software, right? Instead of forcing them to use it. Is that the core principle?
That's the core principle, and it's a completely inverse design framework because instead of just thinking about business metrics and what the buyer wants, you're really thinking about human psychology, social psychology, user experience, things that are delightful for the end user, to the point that even if their boss said don't use it, they still want to download it on their iPhone or Android phone or MacBook and bring it to work because it makes their life easier. A great example of that is this application called Hipchat. Hipchat is basically just kind of a super lightweight mobile chat. And engineers, despite managers telling them use email, use GChat, they still use it because it's fun, it's lightweight, and it's got this integration with Jira, so it makes sharing code easier.
Don't you think though? I mean, this sounds great. It sounds like something that you're, sort of thinking that's something you're investing in, something you're looking at, in your
Yeah.
own words. But aren't isn't this like this is very disruptive and venture capitalists love it, but what do you say to the people who say like, well, wait a minute, what about like function? Like
Yeah.
this is like you're putting a lot of money in here. You're doing a lot of disruption. This is going to cost a lot of companies, productivity in the process of doing this change. There need to be controls. There needs to be security. There needs to be function. And this sort of gamification of the enterprise is really this back door doesn't have any of those things in it. What do you say to those people?
So that is the opportunity for the upsell. So you remember how I talked about the freemium model? So think of this as Trojan horse bottoms up sales. You get your end users to use it. Now in the back, you have as the vendor, have an enterprise version that's got fully robust security, compliance, multi-seat license, collaboration features, all the stuff that the IT department and the VPs want. So that is what you upsell them to. And a very natural business model is SaaS. So it's the standard SaaS model with all of the enterprise features. It's just that you penetrated the end users bottoms up style, not trying to pound on the CMO and try to sell into them for 6 months before you finally get a deal.
I mean, that sounds a lot like, just to make this about, the gamification industry for 1 second, that sounds a lot like the strategy that even gamification platform providers like Badgeville are sort of
Yeah.
espousing, which is
Yeah.
instead of trying to sell, instead of trying to go in, everybody wants to see gamification at Coca-Cola and used universally. Everyone wants
Yeah.
to see it at, Walmart used universally. But instead of taking those approaches, actually looking to get kind of little projects, sort of bottoms up things. What I know that's you're a venture capitalist and you're sort of an investor. What do you and that's good for you. But what do you say to like IT people
To
who
IT.
who look at yeah to IT in the enterprise who looks at that and says, hey, wait a minute, buddy, this is you're trying to like destabilize my ship. That's my job to decide what the software is going to look like.
No, that's exactly right. And that's the classic tension that at some point when users adopt it, IT steps in to want to regulate it. But I do think, again, that's a selling opportunity. So the enterprise version of your product, it's almost like you have two products, right? You've got the one that's designed for the end users to fall in love with and it makes their life better, they'll bring to the workplace. But then you have the one that you would show to IT and say, hey, I understand you got concerns about security and this is messing with your network and firewalls, and don't worry, I've got all those tools, dashboards, compliance things for this enterprise version that you should use. Since your employees have already proven to you they want to use this, why don't you upgrade to the enterprise version? So that's it. It's anticipating the needs of both the end user as well as the IT department and economical buyer. So that's kind of the art of designing these freemium products.
Do you think because I think one of the unique things about you, Tim, and anybody who follows you on Twitter, and your Twitter handle is at time change. Anybody who follows you on Twitter knows you in person knows that venture capital is about seeing the future, and you are particularly strong opinions about this, and you see the future through a very particular prism. Do you think that that in the future we will find gamified experiences sort of everywhere in the enterprise, or are we really talking about applying it to things that today are really boring, like bug tracking and expense reporting and those kinds of things, or is it really something that can be transformative for the enterprise at a kind of bigger level?
It's going to be transformative everywhere. Kind of, my analogy for it is, well, um, 10 years ago, social was, kind of this big new thing, and we thought, wow, this is a whole new sector. Nowadays, social's so ingrained into the fabric of everything, you don't think about it anymore. Every business is just expected to have a Facebook icon and a follow us on Twitter. So when it permeates everywhere, it doesn't become such a big deal anymore. It's just standard business practice. Mobile is now that way. You just expect every business or product as a companion mobile app. And I think gamification is headed in the same direction. Someday, people won't even be debating, is this a real area or not? It's just going to be ingrained into the functionality of everything, every piece of software, every workflow, but it'll be done in such a, I think, seamless and non sort of, over the top way that it'll feel very natural. In the early days of gamification, I think we were trying to use really explicit formats like badges and leaderboards and those sorts of things. But if you think of gamification as a toolkit with lots of different approaches, and most of all focused on low friction and end user engagement and conversion, then it really will, like social, permeate everywhere. And I think it'll just be a standard way of thinking about designing products and experiences. So that's the good news, is the
So
impact will be everywhere. The bad news is we might cease to even even keep talking about it because it'll just be so, ingrained in everything.
So what do you think, and on that note, I mean, you've made investments in, one of the best known pure play gamification, software as a service providers, a number of companies that use it quite heavily. It runs kind of throughout your whole portfolio and lots of things that you talk about and you describe as being great. So what happens to all of those companies that are gamification specialists, that are, the experts at this? And we don't have to name names, but what happens to them in the future where gamification is just commonplace? Do we need a gamification service provider for that?
Yeah, in fact, it gets even bigger market opportunity. The best example analogy I can give is analytics. Years ago, analytics seemed like a fad or something people were like, "Is this really move the needle for business?" Now, gosh, I can't think of any business that doesn't use analytics. And if you look at the number of analytics providers out there that are doing pretty well, then you'll even have specialists in mobile analytics just for games, social analytics just for e-commerce. You'll start to see even niche players pop up that are experts in, say, gamification, a specific field or vertical. At that point in time, it's not just a toolkit, it's also a bit of, well, I think design and consultative professional services help as well. Because the truth is, with a lot of these tools, the thinking behind it, how you implement it and design it, is even more valuable than just rigging it up for gamification. Kind of like analytics, garbage in equals garbage out. If you're not smart about what you measure, analytics doesn't help your business. Similar with gamification, it's not a silver bullet, it's a toolkit, and you got to think real carefully about how you apply the toolkit. But with the combination of expertise plus toolkit, that's a pretty powerful business. So I really think Omniture is a great example of where this is headed.
But you continue, so yes, of course, Omniture is a great success. So it sounds like you continue to be bullish on the investments that you make. Would you be similarly bullish if you were giving advice to new startup founders who came to you and said, "Hey, I want to do a gamification platform startup"? Would you similarly say to them, "Hey, it's going to be a big market, jump in with 2 feet"?
I would say hey, you've got the first generation of leaders, especially the Badgeville, Bunchballs, Gigias out there. You would probably want to pick a vertical or a particular function or niche to specialize in. Just like in if an analytics startup came to me today, they wouldn't say, "I want to take on Omniture." They would say, "You know what? There's these new platforms that haven't really had good analytics packages yet. Let me design for that." So you could imagine that there'll be specialists in gamification platforms just for things like, well, connected TV or wearables or things like that. But the
So,
other dimension, Gabe, I was just going
yeah.
to say is the other way that this market takes off is you don't build gamification companies per se. You just use gamification principles in your business, and that's I'm seeing that pretty universally now. Every business is already wanting to incorporate it.
Right. And in fact, so my latest book, The Gamification Revolution, which you can find out more about it at gamrev.com, we look at all these different businesses across all these different spectra that, leverage gamification
Yep.
and how they're doing it and how this early group of leaders. And I want to talk to you a little bit about the future, Tim, because I think
Sure.
it's something that I know you think a lot about and you talk a lot
Yep.
about. So let's talk about a few different aspects of this. One of the big ones, and I've come under some, a little bit of controversy for talking about this, which is what effect this sort of millennial generation and the younger generation will have on the world, and particularly how it's related to their short attention span, the games that they play, the gamification challenge. Do you feel like the millennials present a unique particular problem or opportunity for startups that need to be addressed
Yeah.
today? Are there disruptions that they need to be following?
I think so. Again, back to product design and user experience design, a lot of this I think is also linked to user psychology, and millennials are a great leading trend for that. Quick example, millennials do have short attention spans, but it doesn't mean that they're scatterbrained. They actually can probably multitask 10 times better than people our age can now. They know how to use multiple applications and screen types at once and have a very fine-grained instinct for when to use SMS versus WhatsApp versus email or something else. And so I think that makes them very good at adopting new technologies. However, they have zero patience to read the FAQ, undergo training, or read a manual. They're used to
Right.
applications teaching them how to use it. Second, they're used to instant gratification for accomplishing things. Quick example, what do you look for when you post something on Facebook or you make a tweet? Within 30 seconds, you want to see how many likes, comments, repost shares, what validation and attention did I get for what I just did? Because that's the payoff, if you will. Imagine that in a work context. If I'm customer support, normally I just field calls and people around me have no idea how I'm doing. There's some basic metrics of like, how long I'm on the call, but could I have that same feedback system for all the things I do, sort of like, a plus one or a like? Um, those are stats, if you will, that provide a lot of gratification for workers. And if you just rigged your enterprise software to provide ongoing, constant sort of gratification and scoring feedback for people, I think millennials in particular would resonate that really with that really well. And it actually makes jobs more satisfying because you're getting constant scoring and feedback, and you feel like you have control and visibility into how you're doing.
And so what about the reverse though? So let's say you don't do that, because to me
Yep.
it feels like this is a tremendously disruptive moment. The companies will literally be able to take talent away from other companies because they have a workforce, a work environment that has better positive reinforcement, more immediate reward. And similarly, startups looking to design products that talk to customers, the
Yeah.
startup that can deliver that instant gratification, Instagram even has it in its name, or Vine with its like, kind of more narrow focus. Don't these companies that think about and really think about gamification as an ingrained idea, not the layer, but the foundation, don't they get some significant advantage with this generation?
They do because it'll be easier to train new employees and it'll be easier to retain and delight those workers. Because think of what you're used to today. You work in a company, you get maybe a quarterly performance review. It's very nebulous. Both sides are really, kind of awkward when they go into it. The manager often doesn't have a whole lot of deep things to say other than, you're doing overall pretty well. Sometimes it's struggling to think of some area for improvement and makes up something like, be more proactive. Well, how do I measure that?
Huh.
Right? So
Huh.
you know what I mean? So instead, if workflows can have more feedback and even crowdsourced feedback from other workers, my favorite example is how Phil Rosedale came up with the love machine algorithm for Linden Labs, the Second Life company. The quick gist on that is every employee had, say, like 100 points, but you gave them to other people to call out things that they did at a just everyday level that you really appreciated. Turns out that was even more effective than top-down management performance reviews because managers don't have the time to see every little thing, good thing that people come up with on a daily basis, but your coworkers do.
Right. And I think that's been the premise of a lot of gamified employee feedback systems like the work.com, which the
Yeah.
underlying startup Ripple was a big story, 18 months, $65 million exit to Salesforce because they were kind of unlocking this, gamified, view of the world that's different from the way that it was before. Can we talk about a different space for a second, which is the kind of health and wellness space?
Sure.
Lots of attention paid to kind of health and wellness, particularly both on the corporate side, right, the enterprise, which is again something I wasn't expecting to talk this
Yep.
much about, but I've
Yep.
been talking a lot about, and on the consumer side.
Right.
What do you think is what do you, when I look at it, everything that's happening with, with wellness, quantified self, for example, seems to
Yep.
me to lean fairly heavily on gamification principles of reward, feedback, sociability to try to get people to succeed. Do you see a big market opportunity there? And if so, what do you think are the places where, startups in particular need to be looking at in that space?
I think health is actually one of the biggest prize markets to go disrupt with gamification, because what we're really talking about is behavior change. Game mechanics, if anything at all, probably the most powerful thing that they can help implement is behavior change, whether it's for new users, existing users, or retaining power users. Um, Health and wellness by nature is a struggle for a lot of people because it involves behavior change. You have to eat differently, you have to exercise, all these sorts of things which may not be fun by nature, but gamification can potentially make behavior change a bit more fun or at least more engaging, or most of all, more visible and measurable. I spend a lot of time actually these days in the social sciences realm trying to understand human impulse and sort of all the emotional and psychological and social drivers behind a lot of these things. And one finding that I had come across was that human beings I guess their sense of happiness or satisfaction often can be correlated with a sense of being in control. A sense of being in control often also comes from being able to sort of measure yourself or see how you're doing or get feedback in real time and feel that you have some sense of control over that. And gamification, if anything, provides a scoring system at least, right? Um, when you're doing behavior change for things that are not fun, a lot of it's about self-denial and discipline. There's never been a lot of positive reinforcement for that. Every day I stare at Twinkies and cookies and candy bars that I'm constantly saying no to in my mind, but there's no, positive reinforcement moments for those days where you're just being disciplined and saying no to that donut, right? Whereas a gamification may be able to help with some of reinforcing that self-discipline part, because self-discipline is about willpower. Willpower is actually proven to be a depletable resource. So I think of gamification as one of the most powerful ways to be able to track and maybe engineer and optimize people's willpower and discipline towards behavior change and make them hopefully feel good about it and in control along the way.
So it's like saying yes to saying no to that donut
Correct.
is the strategy. And Tim, I love it. You're always so interesting. You got so many interesting things to say. And for those of you who are fascinated by this intersection of venture capital, gamification, the social sciences, and the enterprise, there's nobody better to follow and track than Tim Chang. You can find him on Twitter at @TimeChange. Thanks for being with us today, Tim.
Thanks again. Take care, Gabe.
Awesome to see you. And to all of you who are with us here on the Gamification Revolution, thanks. You can find out more from the great speakers at Gamification Summit at gsummit.com. My new book, The Gamification Revolution, at gamrev.com. And you can also join us here again next week where we'll have another fantastic guest. In the meantime, everybody, see you soon. Keep having fun. Thanks again, Tim. Bye bye.
Bye.